Hey, what's up everyone? It's Emily and welcome back to my channel. The Last of Us has kind of taken over my life. It has taken over my For You page on TikTok. It has taken over everything. I mean, if you're not on Page Talk, I don't know what you're doing wrong with your life, but you're missing out. So I am a new lover of the video game. This is my husband's t-shirt that he gave me because it doesn't fit him anymore. But my husband Hugo has been a longtime lover of this game, the first and the second one, and I recently just finished playing both of them. And I have to say, it is some of the most brilliant storytelling I have ever experienced in my life. And so we have been watching the latest episodes coming out every week as soon as we can. It comes out really late here, so we end up watching it on Mondays because Sunday is like never a good day to watch it for us. And we have been absolutely loving the show and comparing it to the video game and everything in between. And so I thought I would take all of the loves of my life, like these video games, the TV show, and books, and give you guys some recommendations that I would recommend to you based on this TV show or the video game, if this is something that you love. You're going to see a lot of repeated themes throughout a lot of these books, and that's kind of on purpose because I'm trying to match them to the themes in the show, even if the book doesn't necessarily directly relate to a zombie apocalypse or anything like that. So if you're wondering why I chose certain books and you can't really see the connection up front, that is probably why. It probably has more to do with the underlying themes of the show. Also, spoiler warning for the games and the TV show. Well, I think the book that is probably the closest to The Last of Us that I can think of is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And this book I feel like is kind of polarizing, like you either read it and you love it or you hate it. So I think if this is something you want to look at reading, I would definitely see or read part of it to see if it's kind of the kind of book that you would be into. I read it and I enjoyed it when I read it, but I think looking back, I don't know if I would enjoy it as much now just because of the way it's written. The main premise of it is a father and a son, I believe they're both unnamed, are traveling through a post-apocalyptic United States. And they started in the north and they're heading towards the coast to the south because it's getting too cold and they don't think they're going to survive the winter. So it's just the dad, his son, and their shopping cart, and they both have like a knapsack or something with them. On their journey, they talk about and come across a lot of things that we would find to be similar in The Last of Us. I don't want to spoil the book too much. Like, I will spoil the game, no problem. But I feel like with these books, they are also experiences in and of themselves. So I just want to say, like, I would say the ideas of humanity and surviving in a post-apocalyptic world, I think those are very similar elements in this, as well as a father trying to protect the innocence of his child and, you know, understanding that in this world they could die at any moment. Someone could come across and kill them. Like the dad could die, the son could die, and this like need to protect another human being, and that being his child. So it's been a while since I read this book. I do remember enjoying it a lot, but I would definitely say of all the books on this list, this is probably like the closest to The Last of Us as a whole. And I think it comments a lot on like morality and what it takes to survive in that kind of environment and just how harsh it is to live in a world like that. The next book I want to talk about is a really fun one. It's called The Zombie Survival Guide. Now, I have to tell you, I read this book probably 5 times when I was a kid because I thought it was real. I wanted to be prepared for the zombie apocalypse because I genuinely thought that could happen at any moment and I needed to be prepared. So my dad actually bought this book for my brother, and then I took it from my brother and read it like a million times and like studied it and memorized it. It was kind of amazing. It's written like a nonfiction book, so this is very different than the rest of the books on this list. It's a fiction book written like a nonfiction, as if you were reading this to survive the zombie apocalypse. So it literally goes over basic first aid training. I mean, and that part I think is like real. I don't think it was like joking about that, but it talked about, it had supply lists. It had ways to avoid zombies, like where they're all going to be, what it's going to look like right before the outbreak, how this outbreak would happen, where you should go, how you should stock up supplies. I was like 11 years old reading this book, like becoming one of those like survivalists that like wants to stock up their basement. I was insane. So, and it talks about different weapons, the pros and cons of each each weapon. It was so cool. I really love this book. I also think it's one of those like fun like gift books that you could give someone if they're really into zombies. Like, it's just fun, I think, but it's also just really well written. And obviously zombies. And I know that in The Last of Us, they're infected, not zombies, but close enough. I think it's very interesting, and I think it would be a really fun book for anyone to read if you just want to try something super different. Or if you're not really into reading a lot of fiction and you just want something to read that's just unlike anything else, like this would be a good one. The next book is one that I recently read on audiobook. It's called Wilder Girls, and I didn't know much going into this book, and reading it actually was a pleasant surprise because I looked at the Goodreads reviews. It was fairly lowly rated for like what I thought it would have been rated. This book takes place during a pandemic of this disease called the Tox, and it takes place on an island off the coast of Maine at a boarding school academy called Raxton Academy. And so it's basically a group of young girls, young women. I mean, I think the oldest one is like 18 or something, and the two adults that are still there with them. And this disease is unlike most other diseases where instead of like coughing and just getting sick, this disease, on top of doing those things, also makes you develop some really weird things. So like some of the girls have gills, one of them has two spines, one of them has like a scaled hand, and then another girl I think has like a third eyelid that grew in, and so like she's blind in one of her eyes because she can't see out of it anymore. It's very grotesque, and the descriptions of it can get very, very horrific. I'm not gonna lie, there were parts of this book that I was like squirming in my seat because I was like, ugh. So there is a horror element to this. There is also like a teeny tiny bit of LGBTQ representation. I think where a lot of the bad scores come from is that people heard about this because of the LGBT representation, and that it was just really lacking in that aspect. And I have to agree, like I would not read it for that at all. It is there, it does exist in the book, but I felt like similar to The Last of Us, this book really focuses on the characters and their response to living in this world. It's not very plot driven. It's very, very character driven in my opinion, and it's more about like, what would you do for the people that you love and for the people that you care about, or the people that you've been forced to care about because of proximity, and just trying to survive in a world that wants you to die, honestly. And just consequences, the consequences of trying to survive and like what that does to people. It was just, I thought it was really interesting. I wouldn't say it was like the best book I've ever read, but if you loved The Last of Us and you want something that's kind of in a similar vein that's very character driven, I think this is a really good choice. The next book I want to recommend is Entangled Life, which is a nonfiction book. I haven't read this one yet. It is on my list. I cannot wait to read it at some point. All the reviews about this book say that it is like mind-blowing and that they've learned so much. And it's basically a book all about fungi and fungus. And so if you're someone who is like watching The Last of Us or playing the game and you're really interested in the cordyceps and, you know, the tendrils, the spores, how mushrooms work, how they like communicate with each other, this is supposed to talk all about that and the effects that it has on us today as people and humans living in this world. It is supposed to be absolutely mind-blowing, and I cannot wait to read it. So I'm definitely going to just recommend this one because I just hear it's amazing, but also just the direct correlation to the show and the game with the cordyceps and the mushroom fungus sort of deal. I think it is fascinating, and if that is an aspect of the game that you find really, really interesting, this is going to probably be the book for you. The next book I want to talk about is The Troop, and this book scarred me. No joke. Similar to The Wilder Girls, it takes place on an island, although this time I think we're off the coast of Canada, like on the other side of North America. The book starts with a man showing up on an island with this troop of Boy Scouts, and he is hungry. And he looks like he hasn't eaten in like days. And when they feed him, he just like is still hungry. He's always hungry. I have to say, this is probably one of the most horrific books I've ever read in terms of like body horror, mutilation, like super heavy trigger warnings on this book. It made me nauseous at points and I had to like pause the book and like go sit in the other room. The themes are very similar to The Last of Us in terms of like survival and like relying on each other, but also like not trusting anybody because shit goes down very quickly in this book. And also it questions a lot about like morality and how humans work and how we interact with each other. And there's just a lot going on here. It's a very interesting take. Very horrific. If the gorish elements and like yucky parts of The Last of Us is something you really love, I think this would probably be a good one for you. I don't want to give too much away about it because I feel like that also kind of takes away from how this book operates, but just check your content warnings if you are someone who's squeamish and doesn't like, you know, body horror, gore, mutilation, anything like that. Like, just watch out for yourselves. The next book I'm going to recommend is The Fisherman, and this is probably the one that makes the least sense on this list, I think. However, I do think it still belongs here. It's a mythical horror book about two men who are both grieving after the loss of their wives. So we have this like element of grief and death hanging over us the entire book. Their names are Abe and Dan, and they connect over the loss of their wives and their families and basically everything else, and they bond over this love of fishing that they both share. And one day Dan tells Abe that he wants to check out this place called Dutchman's Creek. And it's this like hidden spot that like Abe couldn't find for the longest time, but they found it. And fishermen have been known to go missing there. And there doesn't really seem to be a reason why. Like there's nothing weird or wrong with this place, but there is like some lore around it that they explain in the book. I don't want to tell you anything more than that, but there is some lore around it all, and it gets pretty creepy, pretty grotesque. It's very much psychological more than it is physical horror, which I thought was really, really cool and well done. It is a very slow burn though, so if you don't like slow burn books and you want something a bit more fast-paced, this one probably won't be the one for you. But the main theme of grief and the way that it manifests itself within humans, I think, is a topic that is like heavily explored in this, and I think it's also something heavily explored in Joel's character as well. And so I think that that is a very common theme in both of these. If that is an aspect of the game and TV show that you like, that this would be a good one for you. The next book on my list is Tender is the Flesh. And guys, I read this book on a whim. I had read about it and I thought it sounded interesting and I wasn't really sure going into it, and then it was crazy. So this takes place in a dystopian world where a virus has killed off all of the animals. So including like dogs, cats, cows, pigs, everything. All of them dead. In order to sustain humans and meat consumption, they make cannibalism legal and they breed humans. In the book, they call them heads. And they breed humans for consumption. And these people are nameless, they are stripped of all humanity, they're naked, they are held in cages just like animals would be. It's pretty messed up, I'm not gonna lie. And it's weird being like, I read this book and it was interesting and I enjoyed it. But because the enjoyment doesn't come from the subject material, I think for me it comes much more from the topics that are discussed through the text. It talks a lot about, you know, morality and what makes someone a person, and if we rob people of their humanity, are they still human? And I mean, obviously, in my opinion, yes, they are. But like the way that these characters operate, it's very interesting, and the kind of world that they then live in because of all of this. Obviously, in the TV show, there is some cannibalism that is represented, and it's a little bit different than in the game. I would say that this probably leans more towards like the people in the game, but I think the way that like David views humanity in the show and everything, I think that that is very much reflected in this book and is a big part of the discussion in the plot. This book is super messed up, and I have to say, again, almost as much as The Troop, like super heavy content warnings. Please take care of yourselves. Don't read this book if you are going to be triggered by anything along those lines. It's pretty messed up, but I would say the conversations that come from this book are incredibly important and very interesting. And if you want to read something different that's like a little bit off kilter, messed up, and deals with like the underbelly of morality and humanity, this is definitely a good one for you. The next book I want to talk about is Bird Box. You know I had to bring this one up. I bring this one up anytime I talk about horror books. This takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where if you view this specific monster, they don't exactly explain where it comes from, but if you see the monster, it compels you to unalive yourself, basically. So this takes place in two timelines. It takes place towards the beginning of this whole situation and then a couple years later. And we follow Mallory, our main character, and she is on a rowboat traversing through a river blindfolded because she doesn't want to view the monster. And at the same time is caring for these two young children. And then it kind of just flips back and forth between the timelines of that. So you can see how we got here in the first place. If you really enjoyed the dynamic of a adult having to care for young children in a post-apocalyptic world that is like very intense, this is a good one for you. It's also very short, so the pacing of this is really, really fast. So if you're someone who really needs a fast-paced, exciting post-apocalyptic book, this is definitely going to be a good one for you. It's a really thrilling book, I must say, and it definitely doesn't hold back, again, from the horrors of, you know, the scariness of collaborating together and being betrayed by another person, or just the fear of being betrayed by everyone that you hold dear to you, loss, grief, just all of these things. I really think this is a good one for anyone who is a fan of the game and wants something fast-paced, interesting, and very compelling. The next book I want to talk about is All That's Left in the World. I love this book so much. I'm reading it right now. I'm so close to being done with it. I'm hopefully going to finish it today. I knew within the first couple pages of this book that I needed to add it to the list. So this is a young adult queer post-apocalyptic book. We have two boys who are 17 years old and they're very different. If you are a fan of episode 3 of The Last of Us, you probably will like this one. But I feel like anyone who enjoys the show would like this, but if you really want to focus on queer characters, this is a good one for you as well. Basically, in this world, a variety of an avian flu has basically decimated the population. I think they said somewhere in the book like 80% of the people have died. And we have two main characters, Jameson and Andrew. It's from both of their perspectives. They are both the last living members of their family. Andrew is currently going from Connecticut. He's in Pennsylvania, and he stumbles upon this cabin where Jameson lives after his foot has been caught in a bear trap and he needs medical attention and all these things. Jameson decides to help him out, and they kind of form this friendship. And Andrew confesses to Jameson that he is actually headed to Washington, D.C. because he hears that on the 10th of June, the European Union is going to send help and aid to America. And so they decide to set off together to D.C. on foot to hopefully find help. However, Andrew is also hiding secrets from Jameson, and that can kind of lead to some tension, but the book follows them on their journey on foot all the way down the coast. And again, like The Last of Us, we encounter a few similar kinds of groups of people from the game. I would say this book focuses mainly more on finding human connection in this horrible post-apocalyptic world. I have been absolutely loving this book. I feel like anyone who loves the game will also love this book. I'm so excited to finish it, and I feel like if the human connection and like the traveling part of The Last of Us is a part that you really loved, this will be a good book for you. The idea of having hope in this world is a big theme, I think, in The Last of Us and in this book, and I think that that makes this a really good recommendation for anyone who is a big fan of the game or the show. The last book I'm going to talk about today is called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and if you are a reader, you've probably heard about this book, but if you're someone who is mainly a video game player, this might be the perfect book for you to start with. I have yet to read this book. I'm very excited to read it. I hear a lot about it, but this book really is like a love letter to video gaming, it seems like. Said in a lot of the reviews that the main characters are constantly referencing old games, they're playing video games, they're talking about it. It's like the center of this book. And one of the big plot points of this book is them developing a video game together and having like overnight success and the consequences of their choices that come from fame. I also read in a lot of the reviews that the two main characters are incredibly flawed, and if you know me, I love a flawed main character, and I would also say that Joel and Ellie as main characters are also incredibly flawed people, and that is what makes them so endearing and relatable to us as people. This book just sounds groundbreaking within its genre and just different and weird, and I love how many video game references it says that it has. I'm very, very intrigued by this book, and I think that if you're someone who loves video games but maybe doesn't read a lot of fiction, this might be a great place to start. And there you have it. Those are the books that I'm recommending if you are a fan of The Last of Us game or TV show. If you've read any of these books, definitely let me know your thoughts on them down below. If you have loved the game or the show, let me know which one of these books you think you'd be most interested in reading. As always, thank you so much for watching and for being here. I hope you're doing well, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.